Hello everyone. In this talk, we'll introduce the VoiceMOS Challenge 2022. This challenge was co-organized by researchers at the National Institute of Informatics in Japan, Nagoya University, and Academia Sinica in Taiwan. We'll explain the motivation for the challenge and then describe the challenge rules, tracks, and datasets. Then we'll show some of the challenge results. Speech synthesis researchers rely on human listening tests to evaluate their work. One such test is the Mean Opinion Score, or MOS test, in which participants listen to synthesized samples one by one, and rate them on a scale, typically from 1 to 5, to answer some question about the quality of the audio. For example, how natural does it sound? These human listening tests are the gold standard for evaluating synthesized speech. However, they have some downsides. These ratings are expensive and time-consuming to collect, and they can't easily be used as part of a loss function during model training. And they're extremely context-dependent, making it difficult to compare results across different tests. These drawbacks are the motivation for automatic speech quality assessment. I'd like to point out that this task is so-called non-intrusive speech quality assessment, which means that we have no ground truth sample for our model to compare with. If we have pairs of audio samples and their ratings, we can train machine learning models to predict MOS of unseen samples. In prior work using deep learning, however, it was found that these MOS predictors tend to have poor generalization ability, and that MOS datasets are often too small to train deep learning-based models well. So that's what motivated us to start the VoiceMOS Challenge, to encourage research in automatic data-driven MOS prediction, to compare different approaches using shared datasets and evaluation methodologies, to look at the especially challenging case of generalizing to a separate listening test, and to promote discussion about the future of this research field. Next, we have a description of the challenge. We ran the challenge using the online Codalab platform. The Codalab page for our challenge is still online, so you can take a look and even submit predictions to the leaderboard. We provided participants with 2 different MOS datasets for 2 different tracks of the challenge. For the main track, the dataset was one that we collected ourselves in prior work called the BVCC dataset. This dataset is available online on Zenodo. The dataset consists of samples from 187 different systems from past Blizzard challenges, voice conversion challenges, and ESPNet TTS, all rated together in one large-scale listening test. We collected 8 ratings per sample, and we also asked listeners for some basic demographic information, such as gender, age range, and whether they have any hearing impairment. When creating training, development, and testing splits of the data, we made sure to hold out some unseen systems, listeners, and speakers in the test set. The second track was called the out-of-domain track, or OOD. This means that it is data from a completely separate listening test. We used listening test samples and results from the Blizzard Challenge 2019, which was not included in the BVCC dataset. This is also Chinese language synthesis, so there is a language mismatch with respect to the main track. In addition to making training, development, and test splits, we also created an unlabeled training split, for which we provided participants the audio samples, but not their ratings. We also created a very small labeled training set of only 10% of the total data. These splits were designed to reflect a real-world setting where only a very small amount of labeled data is available. We wanted both to study generalization ability to a different listening test context with only a small amount of data, and also to encourage unsupervised and semi-supervised approaches using the unlabeled audio data. This table shows a comparison between the main and out-of-domain track datasets. As you can see, the out-of-domain dataset is much smaller, with only about 2% of the amount of labeled training data. Here are the rules and the timeline of the challenge. In general, we permitted participants to make use of external data if they wanted, and we also required participants to submit a system description. During the training phase, participants were provided with training and development data for both tracks. During the evaluation phase, we released the test set audio only, and participants submitted their predictions to the leaderboard. We froze the leaderboard during the break phase to compile the results, and then afterwards we opened it again, so that participants could continue to develop their systems. Our leaderboard is still open on the Codalab challenge page, so you can still try it out. We had 8 different evaluation metrics. For both the synthesis system level and the utterance level, we computed mean squared error and 3 different correlation metrics. Following prior work, we chose system-level Spearman rank correlation as the main evaluation metric. We also provided participants with open-source code and pre-trained models for 3 different baseline systems. Our first baseline is called SSL-MOS. We started with a pre-trained, self-supervised learning-based Wave2Vec2 pre-trained model from FairSeek, and we added a really simple linear fine-tuning layer, and then fine-tuned the entire thing for the MOS prediction task using the BVCC dataset. Our second baseline is called MOSANet. This system uses many kinds of cross-domain input features, including features extracted from SSL models. This system does not fine-tune the SSL model, but uses features extracted from it, along with other features, such as spectral information and the raw waveform. Our third baseline is LDNet. For our previous 2 baselines, the 8 ratings per utterance are averaged together for training. LDNet has a specialized structure that can actually make use of the multiple ratings per utterance, which effectively gives you 8 times more training data. No external data, like pre-trained SSL, is used. Now for the challenge results. 22 international teams from academia and industry participated in our challenge. 15 teams tried the optional out-of-domain track. Here we can see the results. The bars are system-level SRCC, and the dots are system-level mean squared error. The bars with lines are the baseline systems. The top chart is the main track, and the bottom is the out-of-domain track. In the main track, 11 teams beat the best baseline. However, you can see that in terms of absolute numbers, the gap is very small. For the out-of-domain track, only 2 teams were equal to or better than the best baseline, and the gap is even smaller. In fact, we did get some participant feedback that the baseline was maybe too strong, and there wasn't much room for improvement. Also, we had initially expected the out-of-domain track to be much more challenging, since it's a different listening test context with a much smaller amount of training data. However, we can see that for the out-of-domain track, the correlations are still very high, and the mean squared error values are low. In the main track, we can see a clear pattern. The dark blue bars are teams who fine-tuned SSL models. The teal-colored bars are teams who used features extracted from SSL models without fine-tuning. And the light blue bars are teams that did not use SSL at all. We can clearly see the benefit of using SSL models for this task, in particular when fine-tuning. Interestingly, we don't see the same pattern for the out-of-domain track, so it may be the case that these models can require more data or be prone to overfitting. Some other popular approaches that we observed in the team's system descriptions were model ensembling, which the top teams in both tracks used, multitask learning, and the use of speech recognizers, which the top team in the out-of-domain track used. 7 teams used per listener ratings, either by building off of the LDNet baseline or by implementing something similar. No teams used the listener demographics that we provided, but 1 team used listener group. For the out-of-domain track, only 3 teams tried using the unlabeled data. The winning team actually conducted their own listening test to get labels for that data. Another team used the data for task-adapted pre-training, and 1 more team tried pseudo-labeling the unlabeled data using their pre-trained model. We looked at which factors made prediction more difficult. we considered seen and unseen categories of systems, speakers, and listeners, since we held these out in our test set. We measured statistical significance of the difference in squared errors for the seen versus unseen category for each team. In the main track, unseen systems were not significantly more difficult to predict for any teams. However, for the out-of-domain track, unseen systems were significantly more difficult for 6 of the teams. In the main track, unseen speakers were significantly more difficult to predict for 7 teams. The out-of-domain track was single speaker data, so there were no unseen speakers. Unseen listeners were also more difficult in the main track. We plotted synthesis system level mean squared error versus ground truth MOS for each team. We can observe that all teams have low errors for the low-rated systems. Higher errors tended to appear in predictions for middle and high-quality synthesis systems. So, some conclusions. Our challenge attracted over 20 teams. We observed the power of self-supervised learning-based models for this MOS prediction task. And there are still some open questions and difficult points related to generalization ability. And we're looking forward to future editions of the challenge. Finally, I'd like to announce that 7 teams have papers here at Interspeech. 5 teams will present their work in the VoiceMOS Challenge special session, and 2 teams attending remotely will present at virtual poster sessions. These are some really nice papers, so if you're interested in this topic, you should definitely check them out as well. That was a summary of the VoiceMOS Challenge. Thanks very much for listening.